Thanks. I'm taking rather a different approach, and I'm not sure that I should have been in this section, but anyway, I've got lots of images to show you. Our disaster, an earthquake, or several earthquakes, and continuing, has been a complete trauma in a way to the centre of the city of Christchurch. And for us, working in the Christchurch Art Gallery, it's been a real learning curve, but now with continued closure, quite a lot of what I'm going to say is what we're doing to keep staff occupied and our profile as high as it can be when you're closed. Christchurch Art Gallery opened in May 2003. It's a unit of the Christchurch City Council. We have some 6,500 collection items and approximately 45 FTEs. So relatively speaking, quite small, but we have an ambitious temporary exhibition and publishing program. We were on a roll just over a year ago, allowing for time closed a conservative projection of 700,000 visitors was ours for the 2010-11 financial year, which is incredible for a city our size, about 360 people altogether. We'd installed a new collections exhibition upstairs, brought to light, so looked rather like any other gallery, I guess, except it was very crisp and nice, and we had some contemporary works in with the old, etc. And this exhibition, I'll just move on. This exhibition by senior artist Andrew Drummond was due to close on the 5th of September 2010. However, at 4:35 a.m. on Saturday, the 4th of September, Christchurch was struck by a magnitude 7.1 earthquake. I was in Akaroa on the Banks Peninsula, but as soon as I knew that the road back was passable, I set off back to Christchurch. I was expecting to see significant damage to this exhibition, but there was surprisingly little anywhere, and in particular, the Andrew Drummond pieces, although delicate, fared pretty well, with just one piece of coal, there are lumps of coal on those little shelves over in the far wall in the far left, one piece of coal falling. Another work of ours, John Reynolds' Table of Dynasties, 1,652 individually painted and stacked small canvases, took a bit of a tumble. In fact, for our staff and for us, this became an internal seismic indicator. Generally, it took a +5+ on the Richter scale for the pieces to tumble and shake. And every time there was an aftershock, we'd run round to see what it was, what our estimate was on the scale. Over the next few months, we restacked parts of this work from time to time, and we were surprised by its resilience in the shakes. However, during the earthquake on the 22nd of February 2011, the novelty wore off and the work was returned to storage. Civil Defence took over the building immediately after the fourth... Sorry, it's not moving. There we are. Civil Defence took over the building immediately following the 4th of September. This was because our lights were on, we had a backup generator, and councils, the city councils just over the road, were not, and no one knew where the switches were. In fact, they were just moving into a new building, hadn't entirely moved. What we found, though, our place was taken over, computers, telephones, office chairs, everything was systematically removed from our offices. Any available spaces were taken up with civil defence and city council staff, as their new building was not yet officially opened and only half commissioned. It sustained quite a lot of interior damage as well. All in all, the gallery was only occupied for 10 days, but back then it seemed like a life sentence. Gallery staff pushed forward with our plans for a large exhibition by renowned sculptor Ron Muick, which was shown both in Melbourne and here before it came to Christchurch. And we opened to the public again on the 14th of September. During the time we were closed, we'd begun demounting our downstairs exhibitions ready for Ron Muick. Having been Civil Defence headquarters, we found was reassuring for our visitors. They saw that we had a safe building and it could withstand a major event. But the earthquake had received worldwide attention. Lenders to the forthcoming Ron Muick exhibition were supportive in principle, but naturally some had misgivings about sending valued works of art and their staff to an earthquake zone. The local state of emergency, which began on the 5th of September, kept being extended, partly because new legislation needed to be passed through Parliament, and it was only lifted on the 16th of September, so some 14 days after the earthquake. The extension of the state of emergency in Christchurch and the lag in good information on official websites made institutional lenders, particularly in Australia, nervous about their staff travelling to New Zealand. I think the federal government website in Canberra was particularly behind, and it was hard for us to convey to our colleagues at the National Gallery that people didn't have to boil water anymore in their rooms and hotels, and in fact we did have some hotels still. I worked incredibly hard during those first 2 weeks to turn around perceptions that we might be an unsafe place to send art or people to. And here's the team installing Pregnant Woman from the National Gallery in Canberra. That is a very fragile work, and I think I was probably lucky that in my time here I appointed to the registration staff of the Queensland Art Gallery someone who was head of the curatorial division in the National Gallery of Australia. So I think perhaps it was good having that little, having appointed them to their first job in a gallery. I think they owed us one, more or less, or I at least had a run on the block effectively for keeping this loan coming. Ron Muick became by far the most successful paid exhibition in Christchurch ever. Queues stretched out of the building, across the forecourt and down the street. We had 135,000 visitors. Remarkably, 1 in 5 were local residents, and we have good data in support of this. At the end of Ron Muick, however, it was back to business as usual. We set about installing our next exhibition of shows, one of which was ominously called D-Building. The exhibition was themed around a moment usually hidden from gallery goers, the time when the show ends, the doors close, and the exhibition takedown time begins. So we opened D-Building, and here you can see a slide of the entrance to it. We were using the temporary walls that we'd had up for Ron Muick and exposing behind the scenes in this exhibition as part of it. We also opened an exhibition of works by Leo Benseman and Van der Velden, Petrus Van der Velden's Otera series. The Otera Gorge is on the way from Christchurch to the west coast. We had a grand opening on the 10th of February 2011, 5 months after the September earthquake. It was a deliberately big celebration. 2011 was going to be a good year, and we promised everyone who came to the opening of that. However, on September the 22nd, a national emergency was declared. The Christchurch Quake Map is still a popular website, 10,000 or more seismic events later. February's earthquake was very different to September's. It was a busy working day, Tuesday lunchtime. There were a lot of people about. By this time, the main priority for many was checking that family were alive. Communications were down or delayed. Some people didn't hear from family for hours. It was a nightmare. Essential staff and those who were able to stay became vital to the setup of the Emergency Operations Centre, and it was set up immediately again at the Christchurch Art Gallery. In fact, the people who'd been in the City Council building over the road took about 2 minutes to decide the art gallery was the right place to go again. There are lots of stories. One of our staff members, this is a press photo of the dust in the centre of the city taken from the Kashmir Hills. But one of our staff members' wives was on level 5 of the CTV building on your left, which collapsed and had a considerable number of people were killed there. But she survived with considerable bruising, but took about 3 hours to be got out. Another had to go and pick up 2 young teenagers from their inner city school along Cashel Mall. Cashel Mall is one of our main shopping areas, and this area, and certainly the east side of Christchurch, was more like a war zone. This time, the art gallery suffered some damage, the building, but it was still strong and operational. A national crisis management team was set up in the basement of the Beehive, that's the government parliament buildings in Wellington, and civil defence set up in the gallery again. Sorry, this is a bit tough. There we are. Sorry, it should go back one, I think. Civil defence set up in the gallery again, this time within 20 minutes of the earthquake. Here we have a scene in the foyer of the gallery at 12:58. Children are crouching like turtles in the little group off to the right. Ceiling tiles have fallen down. The suspended ceiling had become a risk, and anything not tied down fell over or rolled about, including our cash donations box, which you see in the front here. If we have time after this, I've got a short video, just about a minute, showing you this happening, and we'll show that afterwards. After an event like this, though, it's really important to capture CCTV footage and take photographs of the damage for insurance purposes, but also for learning. I know that this one has been used, in fact, to help train carpenters or builders in the importance of making sure that ceiling tiles are carefully relocated. Here's one taken in the art gallery shop. Display units slid around the shop, fixtures and fittings gave way, making the most mess, and we didn't have communications immediately. We didn't know how bad things were. And since this is a group of librarians, I thought you'd be interested in our gallery library on the 22nd of February. So from Ron Muir, we became emergency headquarters, this time for 7 months. Staff responses were unpredictable. Water and liquefaction was everywhere, vehicles snaking along the road and the footpath. After having worked all night, I'm sorry, I seem to be... Yes, after having worked all night, these soldiers are sleeping in the gallery corridors. There were cordons around the city, and security access cards were vital to get to and from the gallery. We were dealing with guards at the cordons, many of whom were army personnel from overseas. Security, of course, was 24/7. Security fences were put up. Access cards were vital to get to and from the gallery, and we've now issued all our staff with 2, one to keep at home. This is the ground floor exhibition space where we had the Van der Velden exhibition with City Council staff, arts, HR, events, planning teams. Staff who could be at work had masses to do. It was important that we secured damaged and vulnerable works of art so they weren't damaged further in the aftershocks. We were also required to clear gallery spaces to make room for civil defence teams working in search and rescue. Some gallery staff were almost immediately seconded to work for recovery units. At this stage in a crisis, your building and business needs are simply secondary to the primary focus for the civil defence emergency team, but as far as possible, you need to stay in control. Blair Jackson, our deputy director, was told the army were about to take down Van der Velden paintings as they wanted the space for workers. He was told this at midnight. He managed to dissuade them from this, promising that the gallery team would be there to take works down at 7 a.m. But he was told, in this case, we've got a slide of an Andrew Drummond sculpture in the foyer, and he was told again at midnight that the army had taken down this sculpture. In fact, they couldn't figure out how to take the post out of the ceiling, and so left the scissor lift under it for quite a while. That's the slide on the right-hand side. So for quite some time, the rumour was that the scissor lift was all that was holding the gallery up. Sometimes we couldn't get all the art out, and here you see a space which is occupied with a sculpture by Cat Oburn, a horse in bed, basically, in the background. This time, damage to our galleries inside was more evident. Mostly ceiling panels, light tracks, and jibbed stop wall joints. There was an issue of weight and number of light fittings on tracks, but we were pretty lucky to escape with relatively little damage to works of art on display and in storage. Only 22 altogether sustained damage, mostly confined to chips and knocks on ceramic items and gilt frames, although some works did fall from plinths and walls, and others moved in storage. We had to deal with a flood in our small objects store, which is located one floor below the plant room, and flooding from that poured into a storage room. Luckily, small objects are mostly ceramics and sculptures, and nothing was damaged. However, we were certainly occupied, and well and truly occupied. Here's our gallery map with all sorts of parts of the civil defence emergency area taking over, logistics, etc. Later in the year, in October last year, we relocated our collections to this downstairs area, which I've put in red here, and I'll show you that later. There were people everywhere. Under the stairs, everywhere in the foyer. Here's under the stairs. Here's a morning briefing. There were daily foyer debriefings in the morning. We managed to get Wi-Fi installed in the building, and we've kept it. We were asking for Wi-Fi for about 3 years, and never had among our arguments that we might be used as civil defence headquarters. But they have left that with us. We had media briefings. This is the Prime Minister and Jerry Brownlee, the very large Minister of Earthquake Recovery. He had my office for a while. I thought I might need a new chair. The media were always wanting more light, and they brought their own eventually. We had mayoral debriefings in the foyer, media briefings, and as the emergency headquarters, the gallery hosted a number of distinguished visitors and celebrities on sort of morale-boosting visits. Russell Crowe, Rachel Hunter, Richie McCaw, and Prince William all came to give Christchurch a thumbs up. Catering was done from the gallery's cafe, and this was what we called the Royal Flush. These were the portaloos that were outside the building, and we all had to use those at first. So you really had to program when you went to the loo in between things. The loading bay was used by logistics. It was full of bottles of water, vests, seal cap boots, hard hats, food, copy paper, torches, first aid kits, blankets, rubbish quadrupled. Workers came on their bikes because they were the most reliable form of transport, and it was pretty much chaos, and as I said, this went on for 7 months. What we decided to do as a gallery was, I guess, first tidy up. This is the librarian's office, just to show you that. We had to look after our plant and equipment and keep the climate control going. That was very important for our collection, and we have had to replace a chiller. Pest control became an issue. This is not a pest, this is a work of art in our foyer. It's by Michael Parakofai, who is doing a commission for Queensland later this year. Certainly, though, cleaning our gallery took on a new meaning when there were 400 people in it, there basically for 24 hours a day. We needed to double pest control measures, birds, ants, silverfish. Workers who were not art gallery staff couldn't understand why they weren't able to eat in the galleries near the storage areas. There was no real staff area, no meeting rooms, and staff were so busy they just stayed at their desks. We also set about helping with art salvage in the inner city, and this is a relatively recent photograph of one of our staff removing a work of art from the convention centre, which is now being demolished. In the aftermath of a disaster, a museum or gallery needs to respond to its community, which includes, of course, staff, visitors, collectors, institutional colleagues and artists. At first, we were criticised publicly for not checking out our creative community, and we were criticised by some people in Wellington and Auckland in particular, but it was quite hard to explain that our staff were, digging silt out of their own houses for the third time. Anyway, we did help some artists move. In this case, one of our patrons owns this old government life building and had let artists use higher floors as studios. So we were able to go in there and help them move works out, half an hour for each of 8 artists, and up and down stairs that were in the dark because of the electricity situation, and taking works off their stretchers. In this case, we've helped some a dealer gallery, the Brook Gifford, get works out just before that whole street has been demolished. We also have spent time, obviously, in the reality of the aftermath, looking at our disaster plan. This was the plan that we had. It was 180 pages long. It had a tab for earthquakes, tsunami, floods, etc. We laughed somewhat hollowly when we saw what was written in the event of an earthquake. It said, "Warning times may be brief, or there may be none. Earthquakes may be accompanied by a loud rumbling sound." And it went on about listening to battery-operated radios and waiting for people to tell you what to do. It was not at all like our experience. What we had in that document was a perfectly good collection salvage document. We learnt from experience, though, that a large-scale disaster affects your organisation and your staff in different and sometimes unpredictable ways. This is now our business continuity plan. It's about 25 pages and is now in induction packs. So we've really honed it down. Our previous plan aligned tasks with specific staff. The reality of what we faced was different. A number of staff were unable or unwilling to come into the central city in the first few days. A communication strategy had to be set up as we went along. Yet in the wake of a disaster, more than anything, people need information. Staff needed to know whether the organisation needed them to help and in what ways, and whether or not their families were okay. And slightly after the initial response, Lenders to the gallery needed to know whether their works were safe or not, and your wider circle of supporters will be anxious to know that the public collection is safe. You can't make assumptions based on the role of the person in the gallery's structure or their ability prior to assessing them in a disaster. Their strength of character sometimes varies quite considerably and doesn't necessarily tally with the degree of seniority or responsibility held in the organisation. Some staff members with nominated roles in our previous plan just simply weren't able to come in to assist with the salvage. They lived too far away. Some people were extremely stressed and poor quality information flew around. What we found when we rang around in the first 48 hours was that some staff had left town, a number had broken homes or no roofs on their house, some were looking after neighbours and friends, and of course the schools were closed, so some staff had children at home with them. Our plan now specifies roles, but basically allocates those to salvage roles to people who are available and able to come in. So we basically set up our teams like that. We had to ensure that that key staff have work cell phones, and we had to make sure, it was a really simple thing to make sure that you've got your staff cell phones in your own telephone. It's all very well having them on a list somewhere, but you've got to have them in the telephone. We do now keep a very close eye on making sure our list is up to date, including next of kin, just in case. And we also have a gallery's lenders list so that that's kept up to date and accessible. We've set up an email list where a very short message can go direct as a text message to staff on their mobiles. And we've developed this new business continuity plan. Our staff have resisted prioritising the collection items like nothing before, but in the wake of the earthquakes, we've now developed a priority list based on value and vital to the collection and vulnerability. And we know exactly where all those works are. We've checked out our disaster bins. They weren't up to much before, but we certainly now open and inspect everything reasonably regularly and have it ready to use. And we're about to issue staff with these vac packs, which they can put a pair of flat shoes in, and they've got a wind-up torch, a whistle, and they can put a jersey in it or something like that. Christchurch is a lot colder than Queensland. So staff can have those under their desks. There's water in them, and I think that's a good thing to do. Since the earthquake also, we've looked at the way that we hung and stored things, and I don't want anyone here to think that our systems weren't state-of-the-art or up to scratch at the time. We were using top-flight gallery practice at the time, as standard in Australasia. But after the 4th of September, we began to research hanging devices in other institutions in earthquake-prone areas. We bought some of these eventually from Japan, from Kobe in Japan, and the manufacturer generously donated 10,000 worth of the devices to us in acknowledgement of both the Christchurch and Japanese quakes of 2011. It was a very good business move because I'm telling everyone about them. We've also developed simple Dacron padded corners because those new S-hooks do allow the work to move a little bit more, and these, which have been made by our visitor services staff, reduce damage to frames. What you realise in a disaster, though, is that your neighbours' problems are yours. The gallery apartments, those 2 tower blocks behind us, opened in 2007, 14 stories and 43 metres high. The wall is about 2 feet away from the gallery's back wall. They need demolishing. They needed demolishing. We had to do temporary bracing of parapets before the demolition carried on because of the impact of vibrations or potential vibrations. We had to completely empty the storage racks, and we took them down to that gallery that I showed you in the red section, and everything everything that had a crate we've put back in its crate, and we've compacted the storage of the collection here. We also sealed the library to protect from dust with the demolition next door. This is the demolition part way through, and it's still going on. I'll show you a slide shortly. What I realised, though, is that all plans are plans in progress. I just put this slide in to remind me of the 23rd of December, Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock, when I think in many ways the cruelest earthquake of all happened. We were exhausted. It was the last day of work. Everyone was looking for a break over the summer, and another 0.6 earthquake happened. It just, for us, shattered one set of foyer doors on the Friday afternoon, but a quick fire solution with some wood has been put in place. But despite our planning, even in December, we were caught short in a way that we hadn't imagined before. When we were Civil Defence headquarters, we had access to all our plant and systems for back of house, but in December the 23rd, when we weren't headquarters anymore, we were essentially locked out of the gallery for 2 weeks. Most engineers had left town, and public buildings, any time after a 5 on the Richter scale, public buildings had to be inspected by an engineer before people were allowed back in. In fact, we broke the rule and went and checked our collections, and we did find that some ceilings had fallen in that space, and we rang City Council and said, we're not asking, we're telling you that we're going in this afternoon. We can't go on holiday for Christmas without fixing those tiles. And so we did that. We now have an agreement with our council engineer that after a magnitude 5 earthquake, even though we're an unoccupied building, we will have an engineer's check within a few hours because of the value of the collections. In the interim, we've also been doing work, I suppose, projecting ourselves as a gallery without walls. We've been doing a lot on the website. I think what we've tried to do is push the gallery into cyberspace and into the city, given we don't have any spaces to speak of. So we've upgraded and used the gallery's website and Twitter to keep in touch and communicate with our audiences. In particular, staff have been actively blogging from what we call notes in a bunker. Here we have one of Billy Connolly wearing one of our iconic T-shirts, Mickey to Tiki, available only from the Christchurch Art Gallery shop. We've also enhanced the collection online in all sorts of ways. This is a very well-known image from our collection, Rita Angus's Cass, and you can now view it on Google Maps. You can go and see where it was painted. There are all sorts of words there that you can search, including melancholy, mountains, these sorts of things. So it's a very good time to do that sort of work. We developed this is a My Gallery function where people can go in and work with the collection and make small exhibitions, importing works, images and other works from their own collections perhaps. And so we activated a My Gallery function. This was something we were thinking of but hadn't got around to. And we also did a Wish You Were Here sort of little, not a brochure, but a little cardboard piece that we put in our bulletin, and dropped in coffee shops and invited people to tell us what they were missing. At that stage, we thought we were going to open much earlier than this. There's a rather wonderful story we reviewed our forms, and we've got a new copyright form and a new loan agreement. And there's a wonderful story about the copyright being cleared, in particular of this work on the left-hand screen. It's a rather unassuming lino cut from the late 1930s by English artist Rachel Reckitt. Our visitor services staff, the front of house staff, have really taken to this project in a great way, and one of them remembered reading Penelope Lively's non-fiction and remembered that her family was connected with the English firm company Reckitt and Coleman, and so they got in touch with this writer, and she was able to say that her aunt owned the dingo, had the dingo, and we were able to find out that London Zoo bred dingoes and sold surplus puppies. And as a 6-year-old, the artist had been terrified of her aunt's dingo. So it's just one of those funny little things that we've now got copyright approval, but also a great story. We've carried on publishing our bulletin, and we've done what we call works in outer spaces. Here's a work of Julia Morrison's on our forecourt. Here's a work, a video work opposite the gallery in an old deserted house now, The Creation of the World, and that goes from dusk to dawn. It's a bit hard to see because of the lights being up, but here's a close-up of it. Matt Akehurst's sign, "You are here," in some ways says it all. Art is elsewhere. It's why I'm dead keen to come to Brisbane and Melbourne and Sydney as I'm going on and just see art. And here's a wall that we did, which we commissioned an artist to paint on in Sydenham. This wall's been revealed because of 6 or 8 buildings in front of it being demolished. And so we worked with Gap Filler and commissioned an artist to make this work. He was someone we were going to show at the time too. Here's a space that we've now got, we've now prepared as an exhibition space, and it's above a boutique in a 2-storey brick building in Madras Street, one of the few left standing in this part of the city. Where I'm also commissioner for New Zealand at the Venice Biennale, and this work was shown in Venice last year at the Biennale. Our staff have helped install it in Paris. Here's the bull on a grand piano with the Eiffel Tower in the background and snow on it. We're going to bring the red piano back here, the playable piano, back here in June. And this is the view outside of that space. This is the demolition that's happening now in the inner city. There's just one building, that one with the pillars on it, which was a bank building that I think is going to stay standing in this area. And we're proposing to put Mike Parakofai's bulls out here in the devastated landscape. This is a recent image of the Christchurch Cathedral, and I think it says it all about our inner city at the moment. I would like to note that two public works of art are still standing, and in fact the art has probably been over-engineered in the city, and it's still standing, unlike many of the buildings. And this is a photograph taken just the other day from the roof of the gallery of the nibbler taking down the rest of the gallery apartments. It's pretty amazing, and all those modern buildings in the background are coming down. In fact, the Christchurch Art Gallery will be one of only 3 buildings on its entire block. So I think for us, the story of ongoing devastation and destruction and demolition and deconstruction and whatever they call it is a serious part of our story. But the last slide was simply of the gallery, which is still standing strong but needs a good many repairs. Will be closed for another 18 months at least. So it's a completely different story, I think, from the floods. Short and sharp at first, but continuing and with huge consequences for an inner city. And so for an organisation like ours, for your staff morale and ability to keep contributing and motivated, which is a big thing. Thank you.
Well, two extraordinary stories of two extraordinary events. And I think it brings home to all of us how disasters don't just happen. It's the aftermath. And sometimes the aftermath just goes on and on and on, which means the responses have to keep continually evolving. We're very keen today to make this a conversation between us all, so I'd welcome questions from the floor for our two brilliant speakers. I think they've all been stunned into silence. I think by the enormity, the question there from the gentleman.
Good morning. My name's Peter Haggerty. I'm from the National Maritime Museum in Sydney. I'm actually going through at the moment our evacuation procedures, updating that. I'm interested to see how you're able to get it down to such a small document. Did you have outside help? I know you had the experience of that. Do you have outside help to come in?
No, we didn't. We didn't have outside help. We just decided that all that salvage material could be kept in the conservation labs or the collection storage, and it wasn't what you needed immediately. So we've pared it right back to what's needed immediately, to how the teams will be set up, to a communication strategy, and to the immediate. We've just recognised that a lot of what was in our plan initially was for later down the track.
So what you're saying is what you're saying, I suppose, is in a way, is that the disaster plan preparedness, you have to dance on your feet, and it's more of recovery, salvage mode. Is that right? Or
yeah. Well, at first you're in a completely stunned, and in fact we were just following our instincts. There's no time to read a plan when an earthquake's happening and people are literally falling over. It's so we have decided that it's much more important to use it in induction kits, to talk about it, to have the evacuations, certainly the normal procedures that you have, but to really pare it back so that the instructions are much more clear, and it's set out what gallery staff can expect of management, what management can expect of staff, if their circumstances allow it. You do have to take account of the people who've got children at home and that sort of thing. So it's just much simpler. It's not online at the moment, but we are putting it on online on our website, and I'll certainly show you a copy.
Thank you.
Further up the back, thank you.
Hi, Grant Collins from the State Library of Queensland. My question's for Kim. Just with regard to the 211 floods in Brisbane being what was said to be a Q80 event, learnings from that and levels. One of the big problems we had here was knowing what a 5+ metre peak would mean. It didn't get to that, but what would that mean? Our learnings from that, and have they been communicated as to levels around the CBD and out to the regions as well?
Yeah, that's probably a question better put to other agencies in the QPS, but that was something that we really noticed was every time there's a flood in Queensland, it behaves differently. And even the flood this year, as opposed to last year, the flood behaves differently. So I I understand how incredibly difficult it must be for you for planning purposes, but I know that a lot of interactive mapping has occurred, so hopefully there were some really good lessons learned out of last year, but it's not really something that I can comment on in any great depth.
And actually the earthquakes are different too. Sometimes they rock like this and sometimes they're more like that, and you know, it's quite, they have quite a different impact on people and buildings.
Okay.
Christina Yana, State Library of Queensland. I was interested to know about the social networking in Christchurch, or the opportunities for getting information out.
Yes, well, I mean, there's a sense in which, being in this particular session, I probably should have focused a wee bit more on that. But we were not the headquarters. Our personnel were not. We were still the gallery, and the emergency headquarters were the ones that used the information networks more than we did. What we did, though, was certainly Twitter and use Facebook to talk about what we were doing and what was going on. So, you know, we had a picture of Prince William up pretty quickly too. But it was more letting our immediate supporters and people who follow our Facebook and Twitter know what was happening in the gallery. It wasn't our responsibility to communicate with the wider community.
Okay, there also was the other Christchurch group that was promoting what was happening in different areas and getting that information out there. Did you feed into that?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you're talking about.
There was a group of conservators and other people who got together and were passing on information quite quickly after the event and distributing information.
I can't imagine our conservators weren't among that group.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, I'm Ruth Quinn from Charles Darwin University Library. A question for Kim. The increase in the use of the social media was really interesting. Have you had to resource that activity, either financially or human resource-wise?
To a certain degree, yes. I have an additional 3 staff as a consequence of the work that we've been doing with social media. That said, we have moved from being probably 85% reactive in how we deal with media inquiries to being probably 70% proactive. I think last month we put out something like 300 media releases and did 30 media responses, whereas even 3 years ago it would have been the opposite. So we're actually pumping out information and putting it out proactively. While there is a work consequence of that, we're actually saving our work, saving on doing individual inquiries. So we're doing a lot of live streaming of our press conferences, so that journalists who can't get there don't then have to ring up and try and arrange a one-on-one interview. So it's swings and roundabouts to a certain degree, but we are finding that we're able to influence. Sorry, if I could just take a step back. I heard someone speak at a conference in Sydney, and they said that it was a really interesting example that they said that by the time something makes the mainstream media, its community has already made up its mind on that issue, that mainstream media isn't just reporting news anymore, it's reporting sentiment. So by the time you make it to the mainstream media, the community already has an opinion on that matter, and the media is actually reporting that. What we're doing is stepping in down here and helping them make their mind up on stuff. We're actually being a part of that conversation to influence community sentiment. So hopefully saving work or working a little bit smarter.
We've certainly found in the gallery that the media, the mainstream media, pick up things on our Facebook and Twitter before they do the official press release as well. And like you, we didn't have a policy in this area, but we just fired ahead. And policy is now in place, but I mean, wouldn't have a clue what it is, because we're sort of renegades in our community. And art gallery, we do. But it's certainly, we're finding we rely less on press releases and more on, and the press, which is our local newspaper like the Courier Mail here, will pick things up immediately and ring us more before press releases have gone out. So it really is a worthwhile medium to...
The other thing I would say is we've reached a point that I think the latest information I have is every day we get 1.8 million story views on our social media. So we've got a pretty strong voice out there now.
Hi, I'm Zane Jackson from Transport Main Roads. I just wanted to ask him a question. With the Facebook comments that come on from people in disasters, how much time do you spend moderating them and keeping an eye on them as opposed to putting up new information? Just imagine with other aspects of police work, there could be some error, getting into defamation or, the legal side of things. How much time do you spend moderating those comments?
That's something that really kept me up at night when I first started the Facebook page. But we've done a couple of things that have worked quite well. We've worked really hard to educate our online community how to behave on our page. When you go to our page, there are very clear terms of use, and we tell you when we're going to remove one of your comments. Also, since the floods last year, we've come across some really great automated tools which enable us to make sure that the F-bomb never shows up on the QPS Facebook page or any other route. You can do blacklists so that anyone who swears that the post is automatically spammed, so it never pops up. Love that tool to death. That said, we may remove, depends on the topic, of course. There are some really, really emotive topics. I had a chuckle the other day. We put a post up, I think it was an awful story about a baby that had been murdered. I got up in the morning and it said 576 comments, and I clicked on it and you could see about 6 of them. So there are topics that people really get very agitated about, but we've worked really hard to educate people about what's appropriate to put on our page, what isn't appropriate to put on our page. So it's not as much work as it would seem. During the floods, it was almost no work because Queenslanders and the world at large were of one mind. Everyone wanted to help. Everyone was focused on the floods. Everyone was being really supportive. When the floods settled down, we went through about 3 weeks where I was going to close the page down because we had that nice little community going where everyone knew how to behave and they all sort of told each other how to behave. Then we had that massive increase in numbers. We had all these people who weren't familiar with the way the page operated, and it went feral. It was awful, and I was like, oh, what are we doing? But slowly people, we just kept reinforcing the rules, and now we spend very little time moderating the page, and we know what topics people are going to get really agitated about, and we do some front-end loading, please remember this matters before court, or, please be circumspect in your statements. A real hotspot for us is we do a lot of road safety stuff, and we talk about don't drive through flooded waters, and we really hammer that in. But then on the occasion when someone does and they die, people want to get on there and say, why did they drive through flooded waters? And we go, no, this isn't the time for that, folks. Their families are reading this thread. You don't know what happened, just be circumspect in what you're saying. And slowly that message is getting through as well. That's becoming less and less. So it's just about educating the community in what we expect from them on our threads as well.
Thank you very much. Kate and I thought long and hard about what would be the appropriate gifts to give our speakers today, and we thought, keeping in with the disaster theme, and particularly the aftermath, once you've looked after your people and you've looked after your collections and you've mopped up and tidied up, you need a bit of comfort. And what could be more appropriate than chocolate? And because I'm from South Australia, it's Hagues.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. I will be popular when I go back.
Before we break for morning tea, which will be held on the Queensland Terrace just behind us here, can you please join me again in thanking our excellent speakers this morning?
Welcome to the State Library of Queensland and to Queensland itself. I'm Professor Emeritus Rowley Sussex, Chair of the Library Board of Queensland. I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where we meet today, the Turrbal and Yagara people. They would meet at Kurilpa Point, and this is a tradition which we proudly continue today. I acknowledge them and their ancestors who came before them. I welcome you today to the National and State Libraries Australasia Disaster Preparedness Seminar. There has to be a shorter way of saying that. We are so pleased to see attendees here from a range of institutions, including universities, museums, art galleries, and public libraries, and people from a very wide geographical range of places. And I offer a special welcome to Alan Smith, Director of the State Library of South Australia and Chairman of NSLA, to Anne-Marie Schwertli, the National Librarian, to Jenny Rayner, Acting CEO of the Tasmania State Library, Bill McNaught, National Librarian of the National Library of New Zealand, to Jeanette Wright, our own very new State Librarian and CEO in Queensland, and to staff of NSLA. State Library is committed to continuously investing in, protecting and displaying Queensland collections and maintains a strong focus on developing literacy and learning programs both on-site and online. We support a network of 340 libraries around Queensland. The westernmost one is at Birdsville, the northernmost one is at Boigu, which is an island within eyesight of PNG. And this is a very interesting and new kind of network for a library to be undertaking. Our forum today brings together these important state library commitments to share what we've learned from recent disasters and to help us minimise the impact of these disasters on our collections and to preserve them safely for future generations. Today, we will see presentations from staff from Brisbane, Far North Queensland, Christchurch and Victoria to uncover the knowledge gained through the many disasters faced in the past 2 years. We applaud NSLA for the initiative of bringing together a wide range of disaster management experiences of floods, cyclones, bushfires and earthquakes, and providing the opportunity to discuss and provide learning opportunities around the management of these types of events. Last year, and now also this year, proved to us that disasters are never far away, and the floods of the past month in Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria are a reminder that we need to continue to build on learning from these devastating events to help us plan for the future. My own experience of disasters has been rather varied. I was in Prague in 1968 when the Russians decided they wanted to reimpose their form of communism, and my Volkswagen and I beat a strategic retreat in the face of the tanks. That was a time to remember. Last year, I must say that my role was less heroic. I had to have a container of books on my acreage, and as the waters rose and I realised that I was not going to get them all out in time, I assembled friends, and we were like porters with books over our heads. This was a Dr. Livingstone, I presume, moment. We did beat the floods by about 6 inches of water. But you really had to be at the State Library last year to see true heroism. The staff of this institution in wellies, rubber aprons and pink rubber gloves down in the basement sloshing around in the mud, rescuing files and papers and cleaning up what had been a pretty messy, but fortunately not a catastrophic experience for us. The worst of it was that, like so many other institutions, all of our electrical gear and switching gear for the lifts was in the basement. As a result of which, 43 lifts on the Cultural Centre were unusable for several months until parts came from Germany. The clean-up was the easy bit. The reinstituting of the library it happened over a longer period. So in memory of these events, recent and past, State Library will launch the Floodlines exhibition on the 7th of April. This exhibition, which you'll have a chance of seeing a preview of, will showcase the significant events of the summer of 2011-12 and celebrate the power of communities, their stories and their spirit. I now welcome Alan Smith, Chair of National and State Libraries Australasia,